Hey everybody, welcome back to Decode Tech and to another Python tutorial video. In this video we're going to be talking about string formatting. So what is string formatting? Well, with Python and really any programming language, you're going to be working with strings a lot because strings are how you manipulate text. And we saw some ways we can join strings together with the concatenation operator and with the comma. But that can get a little bit clunky, or rather a lot clunky, if you have a lot of string formatting to do and some more complicated ones. So today's lesson is going to be about all the different ways you can format strings in Python. So here I am in old format 1.py, and I have up at the top examples of how we've been formatting our strings so far with concatenation and the comma. Now those work for joining simple strings together, but we're going to be getting into a lot more complicated scenarios, and that won't be near as efficient in those situations. So I'm just going to get rid of these top lines because we already know what that does, and I'm going to get right into the new stuff. So Python had some older ways of formatting strings, but I want to teach those first because even though people don't use them as much nowadays, you might see this a lot in other people's code that either learned a long time ago or even just old code bases that still have this type of formatting around. That way you're not lost when you see somebody else's code like this. So the first way is with percent signs. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to put a placeholder inside the string we want to add another string to, and then we're going to put the value that we want to put into that placeholder. So for example, inside my string here on line 3, I have %s. Now that is going to be my placeholder for a value I want to plug into the string. And then after the first string, so you see my ending quote right there, is another % sign. Now this % sign says, okay, after this % sign is the value we want to plug back in to the placeholder. So you need two % signs. You need a placeholder and you need the value. Now you notice right beside my placeholder, I have an S. You might be able to guess, but that means I want to put a string in there. So %s means a string. So let's try this and see if it works. If it works correctly, it should say this is the main string plus a string. So I'm going to go ahead and run this code. And you see down at the bottom, we do get the result we expected. So this works. Now what if I want to put in an integer? Well, it's %i. So I'm just going to put an I in and change, instead of putting a string in, I'm going to change it to an integer because it'll probably throw a value error or something like that if we give it the wrong data type. So I'm going to put a 5 in for an integer. I'm going to save and run it. And you see we get this is the main string plus 5. So that worked also. Now what if we want to plug two values in? This is where this becomes useful when you want to plug multiple values in. So let's say after is, I put %s and then space. So now this will be a string I'm putting in there. So now I'm putting in a string and an integer. So I need to pass two values to it. That doesn't, however, mean I need two % signs. I still need just one % sign, but I do need two values. So I have my 5 as an integer, and I can do comma and my string. So a string again. Now if I run this like this, we would get an error because once you pass more than one value, you need to surround it with parentheses. So now I need two closing parentheses to close off my string, or to close off my print statement rather. Now let's try running this. Now you see I still get an error because I put my values in the wrong order. In other words, 5 is getting plugged into the first placeholder we have, which we said will be a string. So that's not going to work. Now, all I have to do is switch the 5 and a string, and then we should be okay because that is the correct values to be plugged in. So now we have a string going into the string placeholder, and we have a 5 going into the integer placeholder. I'm going to save and run it. And there we go, that worked. Now the last one we're going to look at is a float placeholder. And as you might have guessed already, you can plug a float in with %s. So remember, it's your placeholder and then a % outside of the string. And now if we're just plugging in one value, we don't need the parentheses, and I'm just going to plug in 5. Now this, even though 5 is an integer, it will display 5 as a floating point number. So let me show you how that works. And there we go, we get 5 with 6 decimal places. Now we got these 6 zeros because by default, floats in Python give you 6 decimal places. Okay, so now I'm gonna add a 0.1 to the end of our 5, so it is a legit float. And now if we want just 2 decimal places or even just 1, what we can do is between the percent sign and the F, we can do point however many decimal places we want. So if we want 1, we put 1. If we want 2, we put 2. So let's test that out. And sure enough, we get 5.10. And I'm just going to change it to 1 to show that that would give us just 1 decimal place. And there you go, that works as well. So to recap, you need a placeholder, you need another one outside of the string to say a value is coming, and then you need a value or values depending on how many placeholders you have. And also if you have multiple values, remember you need to surround them with parentheses like this. Value 2. All right, I'm going to move on to old format 2. Now there's another considered old formatting way that is still very prevalent. It kind of replaced that percent formatting, but now even there's a new one for that. We're going to cover that in just a second. But this is the dot format string method. And a method is really just a function, but it's a function tied to an object. Now we haven't covered objects yet, that's for a future class, but just bear with me. Just for now, know it's a function that manipulates a specific object. In this case, we're working with string objects, and so it manipulates a string. And it looks right like a function, but the difference is there's a dot right in front of it. So this is dot format. All right, so I have a variable main stir that is storing a string, and it says this is the main string plus, and then I have curly brackets. Notice they're not parentheses. So instead of a percent for a placeholder, we're still using a placeholder, but this time we're using open and close curly brackets. And we don't have to specify the type. You just put a placeholder in there. Then I got another variable named plug_var. Now this is the variable I want to plug into my main string in the placeholder. So to do that on line 5, I'm calling my string object, which is stored in main string. So I have main string dot format. That means this format function, or method rather, is going to do something on this object string. And we're going to pass it the argument plug_var. Remember, an argument is just something you pass into a function's parentheses. So essentially, it's going to take whatever is stored in plug_var and plug it right into that placeholder. So now I'm just going to copy or cut and paste this phrase or this statement into our print statement. That way it displays it out on the screen for us. Now we see down at the bottom, that did work just as our percent formatting works. I showed you this variable method first to help you better visualize what's happening with the dot format method. But how you'll often see it used is like this instead. So I'm just going to get rid of this statement, and I'm going to copy this string from our variable. I'm going to plug it back into the print, and then I'm going to show you how it's normally used. So it's used just like a normal string with a placeholder, but then the dot format is called right after the string. And so this looks a little funky compared to other methods run on most objects. So that's why I wanted to show you the variable way first. But this is actually creating a string object right here, and that's why we can call the dot format on it right after that. If you're just beginning Python, you probably didn't get that. Don't worry, we're going to cover objects in the future, and I think it'll make a lot more sense. But just for now, know that the dot format method will work on any string object you create. And it is really just a function. All right, so now what value do I want to plug in? I can either take this variable and plug it in, or I can take the contents directly and plug it in. Oftentimes you'll be plugging variables in though, so I'm just going to show you how that looks. And then I'm just going to get rid of this main string variable because it's no longer needed. Now let's save and run it. And you see this still works just the same. All right, so now what if we want multiple placeholders just like we did with the percent? Well, it's the same way pretty much. We just need another placeholder. So I'm going to put in another set of curly brackets, and I'm going to plug in another value. So I'm going to do comma and put in a new string. Now I'm going to save and run this. And now you see we got our result down here and it worked. Now when I showed you this method with the percent signs, we had to put them in the correct order where you put the values. But with these, you can actually use the indexes of these values to order them however you want them. Now what do I mean by indexes? Well, each argument we plug into the format method, so each value separated by a comma, has its own index. For example, this is the first index and this is the second index. But counting in Python starts from 0, as you probably know if you watched my looping video. We saw that the range function gives you a sequence of numbers starting from 0. Well, that's the same way here. Plug_var is index 0 and a new string is index 1. So that's index 0 and 1. All right, so let's just put in the placeholders 1 and 0. So now we've effectively swapped where these values will go. Now let's try running this. And you see we got the second value where the first value went last time. We got a new string plugged into the first placeholder. And we got whatever was in plug var, which is just a string, into the second placeholder. I hope that made sense. Okay, so we looked at putting floats in with percent signs and being able to say how many decimal places we wanted. Well, how do we do that with the .format method? Well, it's pretty simple. Let's get rid of our string here that we're plugging in, and let's just plug in that 5.1 float again. Now remember, we switched the indexes, so it's going in down here. All you need to do is put a colon in, and then point however many decimal places you want, and the F again. So now let's run this and see if we get our result. Sure enough, we get 5.10, 2 decimal places after the 5. And just so you know, it worked the same if this was indeed index 0 and this was index 1. But of course, only if we actually put this float in as the first value instead of plug var, because plug var is a string. Basically, I just want you to know that the index isn't what matters, it's the colon .2f. Well, the index does matter if you're not plugging in a float at that index, I guess. So to recap, you need a string with placeholders, which is just open and close curly brackets. Then after the string, instead of a percent sign to say a value's coming, you use the .format method. And again, a method is really just a function that is tied to an object. In this case, we're using string objects. And then you just pass in arguments to the format method that you want to get plugged in to the placeholders, or curly brackets. And you can also change the order they come in by putting different indexes in different placeholders. And by the way, just if you were curious, if you tried to put in an index that's not there, like if we tried to put in index 2, well, index 2 would be the third value, and we don't have 3 values, so if we try to run this, we'll get a tuple index out of range. All right, let's go into formatstrings.py. Now this is the current preferred way to formatting strings. Now you'll probably have to work a lot with the old methods of formatting, at least for now in the near future. So again, it is important that you know them. Don't disregard them just because they're not the latest and greatest. But if you can, this is the preferred way to do things these days. And this is called FStrings or format strings. And how format strings work are pretty similar to the .format method that we just looked at. We have the curly brackets as the placeholder, but now instead of .format, right before the string, but outside of the string, so outside of the quotation, you just put a little f. And then to plug in a value, you just put the value right inside the curly bracket. So if I want to put this new part variable in the placeholder, I just literally plug it in right there. So if we run this, this should work. Sure enough, we get the string plugged in just like we expected. Now, if you want to plug multiple values, just add another set of curly brackets, put in your value. So let's just put in another variable here. I'm going to put in a float. So I'll do my underscore float gets 5.5, and then we'll just copy and paste float into our new placeholder. And I don't have to do anything else. That's already ready to go. I'll just hit start and debug the program, and it works fine. Now, what if I want to do the decimal place on the float? Well, it's very much just like the .format. I put in a colon, I put in the number of decimal places I want. I'll do 3 this time, and an F at the end. Run it again, and this time we get 3 decimal places. That really is all there is to it. So that is FStrings. So to recap, we had the first way of doing it, which is with percent signs. The second way is with the .format method and curly brackets. The third way is FStrings, which is still curly brackets, but instead of .format, you just put an F right before the string. All right, let's go into special chars, or special characters. Okay, so what are special characters? Well, special characters in Python do something special. For example, \n adds a new line. So instead of printing \n in this print statement, it'll just make a new line. So it'll say, this is A, and then it'll be like hitting enter on your keyboard or return, and it'll go in the next line and print new line. So I'll show you how that looks by running the program. And you see we get this is a new line printed out to the console. Now a backslash by itself is called an escape character. So if we put a backslash in front of this new line character, it'll cancel out that functionality and just act as though it's part of the regular string. And it'll actually print out \n to the screen. So it escapes that functionality. A backslash by itself will allow you to put text on the next line and treat it as though it were on the same line. So if you get a line that's too long to fit on your screen, you can just do a single backslash, hit enter, put the text down on the next line, and Python will treat it as though it is all one line. And you can see the output down there, put it all in the same line this time. All right, now I put \t in our print statement. And \t means tab. And there's many other special characters in Python. I'm not going to cover them all. You can look them up on your own time if you want. I believe there's plenty of information on those. But just to show you what the tab looks like, I'll go ahead and run this as well. And sure enough, you see the extra big space we get in here because we have that special tab character in. All right, so that's all I'm going to cover on special characters. Now let's head on to your challenge for this lesson. So let's pretend you have a concession stand for hot dogs, and you want to put out a chart of possible calories depending on the combinations they select. So if they select a hot dog, a bun, ketchup, whatever they select, add up all the calories, and we want to show that for all the different options. So just to start out, so it doesn't get too complicated, let's just start with 4 options: a hot dog, bun, ketchup, and mustard that they can pick from. And let's represent their choices with a 1 or a 0. Meaning if it's a 1, they want it. If it's a 0, they don't want it. So the example output should look like this. These are just some headings. So a hot dog, a bun, ketchup, mustard, calories, and a divider. And then down below, a 1 or a 0 to show that they want it. So in the first row, they didn't want anything, so you get 0 calories. In the second row, they wanted just mustard, which that's not really a realistic option, but I guess some people might. And that's just 10 calories. And so on, all the way down to them wanting a combination of everything. So you can pause the video, and once you're done, you can come back and I'll show you a solution. All right, I'm not going to take the time to debug this program during the video, but you can go ahead and copy this code if you want and step through the program with line breaks as I showed you how to use in some of the previous videos in this series. I thought this project combined a lot of the concepts we've been learning very nicely with loops and nested loops, print formatting, and various other things like that, special characters. But that's going to do it for today's video. So if you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. Please subscribe if you're not already. Share the video with anybody that might find it useful. And if you have the means, you could consider contributing on Patreon. And as always, we'll see you in the next Python tutorial.